When he slammed the car door and said, "Do whatever you want," I didn't realize it would be the moment my whole life started to crumble. The asphalt beneath my heels was still warm from the late morning sun, but it did nothing to soothe the icy shock gripping me. I stood there, the hum of traffic around me a dull roar, the smell of gasoline and exhaust filling my lungs, and realized, I had no money, no plan, and the man I had trusted more than anyone had just kicked me out like I was nothing. We had been arguing, as we had been lately, over things I thought were small but apparently weren't. I remember him gripping the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set, eyes hard, the lines on his forehead deepening as if etched by every disappointment he'd ever stored up. I hadn't said anything wild, hadn't thrown accusations. All I had done was ask why he'd been distant lately, why he seemed to vanish for hours on end. And then that line, like a blade, cut through everything, "Do whatever you want." I watched the car peel away, the tires kicking up dust, the heat shimmering off the asphalt, and I felt my legs weaken. For a moment, I considered following him, begging him, explaining. But even my voice seemed to have disappeared, leaving me standing in the middle of a street that suddenly felt impossibly vast and cold. My mind drifted back to the life we had shared. Not long ago, mornings were softer, coffee brewing, the faint smell of cinnamon toast wafting from the kitchen, the way he'd hum while brushing his teeth. We'd sit at the small table by the window, fingers brushing as we reached for sugar or cream, laughing at something silly on the radio. Those moments seemed so distant now, like I was remembering someone else's life, a life that belonged to someone else entirely. I remembered the first time I realized he had changed. It was subtle. He came home later, excuses slipping from his lips that didn't quite add up. He smiled less, lingered less in our small apartment. At first, I chalked it up to work stress, deadlines, fatigue. But little things began to gnaw at me, a lipstick mark on his collar, a faint perfume that wasn't mine, the way he would receive messages in the middle of dinner and immediately step outside to reply. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe in the life we had, the promises we made. And yet, there I was, standing on the edge of a reality I didn't recognize, clutching the strap of my handbag like it was a lifeline. The summer air was heavy with the smell of dry asphalt and fried food from a nearby diner. I could hear the distant laughter of children playing in a park across the street, a cruel contrast to the silence settling over me. The world was moving around me, oblivious, and I felt utterly invisible. I started walking, unsure where I was going, my feet carrying me on autopilot. Each step felt heavier than the last. The betrayal was not just in his words but in the quiet realization that I had been living beside a stranger all along. I felt every heartbeat in my chest, loud and insistent, as if my body was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear, that this was just the beginning, that life as I knew it was over. And then I saw her. I didn't recognize her at first, not fully. But the way he laughed, soft, intimate, the same laugh he once reserved for me, made my stomach twist. She was leaning against the car as if she belonged there, sipping coffee from a paper cup, smiling like the world had conspired to make her happy. My hands tightened around my bag. The smell of her perfume hit me before I could even process it. It was subtle, floral, and utterly alien in the context of my life. In that moment, standing on the hot asphalt with the city buzzing indifferently around me, a single thought consumed me: she had replaced me. Not tomorrow, not gradually, but already. I kept walking, though my legs felt like lead, trying to ignore the scene that had burned itself into my mind. Every step away from that street felt like a betrayal to the part of me that still hoped this was some terrible mistake, some misunderstanding that could be fixed with an apology or a whispered confession. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a mistake. He had made a choice, and I was the casualty. When I finally reached the corner diner, I sank into a booth, the vinyl sticky beneath my palms, and tried to collect my thoughts. The smell of frying bacon and stale coffee did nothing to comfort me. Instead, it seemed to emphasize how ordinary my life had become, how ordinary the pain of being abandoned felt when set against the ordinary clamor of a city that didn't care. I thought about our apartment. The small living room with the threadbare rug, the couch that smelled faintly of him, the photographs on the wall showing smiles that now felt like lies. My hands trembled as I reached into my purse, realizing I had no cash. He had made sure of that. No money, no keys, no plan. Just the echo of his words, "Do whatever you want." They were sharp and hollow, a cruel kind of freedom I had never asked for. My mind drifted to my life before him, the small, manageable routines I'd had, the sense of stability that had slowly eroded over the years. He wasn't always like this. When we first met, he was kind, attentive, funny. We would spend hours in our tiny kitchen, cooking together, laughing over our mistakes, sharing dreams that now seemed childish and naive. I had trusted him with everything, my heart, my future, my sense of self. And now, I didn't even have the dignity to walk away with my own money. I noticed the waitress watching me from across the diner, her expression hesitant, almost pitying. I forced a smile, shaking my head. "Just water," I muttered. My throat was dry, and my stomach twisted in knots, a cocktail of anger, confusion, and grief that made it impossible to think straight. For a moment, I let myself remember the little things, the way he would hum in the shower, the scent of his cologne, the softness of his hands when he held mine. And then I remembered the way his eyes had looked at her this morning, soft, admiring, alive in a way they hadn't been with me for months. The betrayal didn't just sting, it burned, a slow, relentless fire that made every memory I had with him feel tainted, a cruel trick of nostalgia. As I sat there, trying to process the new reality, I realized I had to make a decision. I couldn't go back to that apartment, to that life, not yet. And yet, leaving meant stepping into the unknown, alone. I didn't even know where she lived, where he had been sneaking off to, or how long this had been going on. I felt like I had been asleep for years and had just woken up in someone else's nightmare. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself. The din of the diner, the clatter of dishes, the low murmur of conversation, the hiss of the coffee machine, reminded me that life went on, even when mine felt like it had stopped. I couldn't let him control the next step of my story. Somehow, some way, I had to reclaim the sense of agency he had stripped from me. And that's when the first clue hit me, the little things I'd noticed before, but pushed aside because I didn't want to believe them. The way he always kept his phone just out of sight, the unexplained receipts, the evenings he claimed to be working late that didn't add up. They weren't coincidences. They were breadcrumbs, and now I knew exactly what they led to. I clenched my fists under the table, feeling the tension radiate through my shoulders. The betrayal wasn't just a moment, it was a pattern. And patterns, I realized, were predictable. For days, I tried to keep my life together, or at least pretend I was. I moved in with my sister, a quiet apartment smelling faintly of lavender and clean laundry. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. Every night, I lay in bed listening to the distant hum of traffic, feeling the mattress dip where he should have been. I could almost hear his voice in the silence, telling me I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that I had nothing to worry about. How cruel it was, the way memory can betray you as sharply as reality does. I went through the motions, work, errands, phone calls with friends, but my mind kept circling back to him and to her. I hadn't confronted him yet. Part of me wanted to storm in and demand answers, to rip the truth from his mouth like a stubborn tooth. But another part, the quieter, sharper part, knew that truth had already revealed itself. She was there. She was real. She existed in his life in a way I no longer did. Then came the little things that gnawed at me. A mutual friend mentioning seeing him at a cafe with someone new, his social media activity suddenly full of photos where I wasn't included, the faint scent of her perfume lingering on the clothes he'd left behind. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that grief made me paranoid. But grief rarely feels this sharp without cause. One evening, I finally gave in to the urge that had been growing for weeks. I tracked down the cafe where he had been seen. My hands shook as I walked through the door, the scent of roasted coffee beans and pastries filling my senses. I saw her immediately, tall, confident, smiling easily as if the world owed her nothing but good fortune. And there he was, leaning across the table, laughing, touching her hand. That laugh, the same one I had thought was mine, echoed in my chest, a hollow drumbeat that made my stomach twist. I stayed in the corner, hidden, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him look at me and feel the pain he had caused. But I didn't. I couldn't. Part of me knew that this confrontation wasn't about drama, it was about clarity. About finally seeing the truth with my own eyes. And then I noticed something else, something small but telling. She reached for his phone mid-laugh, swiping through it like she owned it. There was a familiarity there that made my chest tighten. He didn't stop her. He didn't even glance at me in passing. That was the moment I realized this had been going on far longer than I wanted to believe. I walked out without him noticing, my hands pressed against my face to hold back tears. The city outside felt unbearably loud, and the air tasted metallic, heavy with the smoke of cars and the tang of injustice. My mind raced. Had he been planning this for months? How long had he been lying to me while I believed we were building a life together? The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was intimate, systemic, a careful dismantling of trust brick by brick. That night, in my sister's apartment, I sat in the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I poured myself a cup of tea, but it went untouched as I thought through the confrontation I knew I had to have. I needed to hear it from him, not from glimpses, not from whispers, not from the faint trails of perfume and laughter. I needed the truth. But even as I steeled myself for it, I realized the truth might not be as satisfying as I imagined. People don't change overnight, and some betrayals don't come with apologies. Some betrayals come with silence, with excuses, with the world continuing as if nothing has happened. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that silence. I found him on a Thursday evening, in the apartment we had shared, the place that still smelled faintly of him, of our shared life. I had the spare key, something I hadn't used in weeks, but it felt wrong, invasive, stepping into the home that was no longer mine. And yet, I needed answers. I needed him to look at me and see the fracture he had caused. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, the light from the screen painting his face in cold blue. When he looked up and saw me, his expression froze for just a fraction of a second before slipping into a practiced casualness. "Oh, you're here," he said, voice neutral, almost bored. "I need to know," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to steady it. "I need to know everything." "How long? How many times? How could you?" He leaned back, letting out a sigh like he was tired of my questions, like my emotions were a nuisance. "I told you, do whatever you want," he said, almost as if repeating a mantra. "I'm done arguing." I felt my chest tighten, my hands balling into fists. "No. You don't get to dismiss this. You've been with her. Behind my back. While I trusted you. While I loved you." My voice cracked, but I pushed forward. "I need the truth." And then he told me things I wish I hadn't heard. Names, places, excuses, lies woven into half-truths. It was deliberate, calculated, he didn't stumble, didn't apologize, didn't flinch. He described dinners and meetings with her, the small gifts, the subtle touches that I had noticed but convinced myself were nothing. He told me how he had been unhappy, how we had grown apart, how she was more understanding than I ever had been. Each word was like a hammer striking the fragile shell of my heart. I felt myself shrinking inside, the room spinning slightly, my vision narrowing to just him, just the betrayal sitting there across from me. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw something, to rip the life we had built apart piece by piece. But all I could do was stand there, feeling hollow, the weight of everything I had believed crumbling into dust. You're nothing but excuses," I whispered. My hands shook as I gestured helplessly. "I trusted you. I gave you everything." He shrugged, leaning back casually, like my words were feathers against stone. "You always made things so complicated," he said. "I just did what felt right for me." I felt something inside me break, the last thread of love I had held onto, snapping with a sharpness I didn't know I could feel. And then rage came, hot and consuming, not the kind that makes you scream in a dramatic confrontation, but the cold, calculated kind that takes over every thought and every sense. I realized I couldn't cry, couldn't plead, couldn't negotiate. I had to act, but not out of passion, out of clarity. I needed him to feel the consequences, the moral weight of what he had done, without stooping to the same pettiness he had. I left, my steps measured, my heart pounding, and I knew I had to tell someone who could see him for who he really was, who could witness the betrayal in a way I never could alone. But I also knew I had to protect myself first. I had no money, no home, but I had my dignity, and for the first time in weeks, I felt it stir, fragile but alive. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain on concrete. I breathed deeply, letting it fill me, letting the clarity seep in. He had chosen her, and I could no longer let him choose me, not by his terms, not by his deception. The betrayal was laid bare, and now the reaction had to follow. I spent the night at my sister's apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every detail, every lie. Rage and grief mingled into something icy and precise. I knew I couldn't let this go unnoticed, couldn't let him walk away thinking his betrayal had no consequences. But I also knew that whatever I did had to be measured as smart, not reckless. The next morning, I started quietly gathering evidence. Social media posts, receipts, little details he'd left exposed without realizing I'd been watching. Every photo of them together, every comment she made, every coincidental mention from friends, all pieces of a puzzle I was assembling methodically. My hands shook as I copied messages into a folder on my laptop. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, grounding me, reminding me that life was still happening outside of this storm. I also contacted a few of our mutual friends, delicately probing, trying to see if they had noticed anything unusual. Some dodged, some feigned ignorance, but a few gave me confirmations that made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had hidden it in plain sight, spinning a story where I was the problem, the difficult one, the one at fault. I wasn't going to cry anymore. Not publicly. Not privately. I was going to act. The first step was reclaiming my independence. I needed a plan for the money, for my apartment, for the life he had threatened to take from me. I took stock of what I had, what I could access, and realized I still had resources hidden from him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start over, to carve out a space where his influence didn't reach. Every small victory, a bank account I could control, a friend willing to help me move, felt like a stone placed carefully in the foundation of my new life. Then came the confrontation. Not in anger, but in clarity. I requested a meeting with him, in a public place where I could maintain control. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I laid out everything I knew, the messages, the receipts, the eyewitness accounts. I watched his face as I spoke, the subtle shifts in his posture, the tightening of his jaw. For the first time in weeks, he seemed vulnerable, caught in a reality he had tried so hard to avoid. "You lied to me," I said calmly, almost too calmly. "You broke the trust that held this marriage together. And now, you're going to face the consequences. Not out of spite, not for revenge, but because it's right." He opened his mouth, but no words came. He had no excuses left. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of my words settle on him like a physical presence. I could feel it. He realized, finally, that his actions were not invisible, that someone had seen everything and refused to let him off the hook. After that meeting, I moved forward with quiet determination. I took steps to secure my independence legally and financially, but I did it with dignity, not rage. Each day, I reclaimed a bit more of myself, my confidence, my voice, my sense of agency. I wasn't seeking to humiliate him publicly, but justice has its own way of surfacing. And sometimes, the calm, deliberate response speaks louder than any outburst ever could. By the time I walked away from that chapter, I felt lighter, stronger, and, most importantly, unbroken. The betrayal had been devastating, yes, but it had also revealed something vital. I could survive, and even thrive, without someone who treated me as disposable. It didn't take long for the truth to reach the people around him. I had been careful, but the evidence I collected wasn't just for me, it was for anyone who needed to see it to understand the reality of his actions. A few mutual friends reached out, awkwardly at first, apologizing for not noticing sooner, for being complicit in silence. Some family members confronted him directly, their voices sharp with disappointment. I watched from a distance, heart steady, as the ripple effect began. It was remarkable how quickly things shifted when confronted with undeniable truth. His colleagues at work started giving him curious looks, whispers following him down hallways, subtle questioning of his integrity. I didn't seek out this exposure, I wasn't trying to humiliate him. But consequences have a way of finding their own path when the facts are undeniable. One evening, I ran into a neighbor who had always been friendly, always waving hello with a smile. She stopped me, hesitating, and then whispered, "I didn't know what was going on until now. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this." That simple acknowledgement, the recognition of my pain and his wrongdoing, was oddly healing. It reminded me that justice isn't always a loud spectacle, sometimes it's quiet, and sometimes it's subtle, but it lands exactly where it's supposed to. I saw him at the local grocery store a week later. His posture was different, slumped and careful. He avoided eye contact, pretending to be engrossed in the produce section, but I could feel the weight of my eyes, on him. He had been caught. Not just by me, but by the moral compass of those around him, by the truth that he had tried so hard to bury. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spectacle. It was recognition, acknowledgement, and consequence. And in that recognition, I found a strange kind of peace. I didn't have to scream, didn't have to plot elaborate schemes, didn't have to publicly shame him to feel that the balance had shifted. Sometimes, the universe has its own way of delivering justice, and I was content to let it unfold without my interference. Even though the public consequence was unfolding around him, I focused on myself. I enrolled in a course I had always wanted to take, something I had shelved for years while managing our life together. I started volunteering at a local community center, reconnecting with the sense of purpose I had lost in the chaos of betrayal. Each small step was deliberate, each small victory a brick in the foundation of the new life I was building. I realized something important during this period: betrayal is not just about the person who hurts you. It's about the choices you make afterward. I could have let anger consume me, could have allowed bitterness to dictate my days. But instead, I chose clarity, action, and ultimately, healing. I chose to reclaim my life not by tearing his down, but by building my own. The world continued around me, the same streets, the same parks, the same traffic, but everything felt different. I felt different. Stronger, wiser, more attuned to the subtle ways in which people reveal themselves, and more confident in the ways I could protect myself and my heart. The betrayal, painful as it was, had sharpened me, given me a clarity I might never have found otherwise. Months passed, and with each day, the edges of the pain dulled just enough for me to breathe easier. I moved into a small apartment of my own, the kind with sunlight spilling through the kitchen window in the mornings, casting a warm glow over the modest furniture I had chosen carefully, deliberately, for myself. No reminders of him, no shadows of the life that had been stolen from me, just space to exist, to rebuild, and to heal. I started waking up without the tight knot of dread in my chest, without the lingering taste of betrayal on my tongue. I made myself strong morning routines: fresh coffee, a short walk, the smell of damp earth when it rained, the comforting hum of the city coming alive outside. I allowed myself small joys again: the laughter of a stranger on the street, the scent of baked bread from a nearby bakery, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a good book before bed. Each one reminded me that life, even after devastation, could still feel full. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away during the storm, rekindled old hobbies, and embraced new ones. I learned to find peace in my own company, to trust in myself again, and to recognize that my value was never defined by someone else's choices. The act of reclaiming my life became an act of self-love. And then, unexpectedly, I found forgiveness, not for him, not yet, perhaps never fully, but for myself. Forgiveness that allowed me to stop replaying the worst moments, to stop torturing myself with the questions of what I could have done differently. I hadn't caused this betrayal. I hadn't deserved it. But I had survived it, and that survival was mine to honor. There were difficult moments, of course. Walks past the park where we had shared quiet evenings, hearing laughter that once belonged to us in some way, glances at streets and cafes that carried memories too heavy to bear. Yet, instead of letting them pull me backward, I let them remind me of resilience. Of strength. Of the fact that I could move forward, step by deliberate step, with dignity intact. I realized that life after betrayal isn't about erasing the past, it's about weaving it into a tapestry that includes your pain, your lessons, and your growth. The woman who had once been a shadow in the corners of our life became irrelevant. She could exist elsewhere, in his choices, in his story. I didn't need to engage with her or even hate her to reclaim my power. That realization was freeing, almost like stepping out into sunlight after months of storm. I started mentoring younger women at work, sharing lessons I had learned the hard way about trust, self-worth, and boundaries. I realized that my experience, as painful as it had been, could help others navigate similar betrayals without losing themselves. Helping someone else find clarity and strength became a balm for my own wounds, and a reminder that healing is not just an internal act, but a ripple effect of compassion. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still think of him, not with longing, but with a soft acknowledgement that we were never meant to walk this path together. The anger has faded, replaced by a quiet, steady awareness of my own resilience. Life continues, unpredictable and imperfect, but I meet it now with eyes open, heart steady, and a deep trust in my own capacity to thrive, regardless of the storms I encounter. Sitting by my window one evening, the sun casting long amber shadows across the room, I realized how far I had come. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla from a candle I had lit, and the city outside buzzed with life, indifferent but beautiful. I was alone, yes, but I was not lonely. I had rebuilt, brick by brick, not a life dictated by someone else's choices, but one I had deliberately chosen for myself. I thought about the journey, the shock of that day when he kicked me out of the car, the slow unraveling of trust, the quiet heartbreak of realizing he had replaced me, the deliberate steps I had taken to reclaim my life. Every moment had been painful, but every moment had also taught me something profound, that I am stronger than betrayal, wiser than deceit, and capable of walking away with my dignity intact. Sometimes I wonder about forgiveness, not for him, but for myself, for the woman who felt powerless and abandoned. I think I've finally found it, not as a surrender, but as a liberation. Forgiving myself for what I couldn't control, forgiving the circumstances that tried to define me, has made room for peace. And yet, I also carry the lesson of caution. Trust is sacred, but vigilance is necessary. Love can be beautiful, but it should never come at the cost of your self-respect. I share this story not to dwell on pain, but to illuminate the resilience that lives in every heart willing to survive. As the evening deepened and the city lights flickered on, I felt a quiet smile tug at my lips. Life goes on. Pain will always visit, but strength, dignity, and clarity are ours to nurture. I am not broken. I am not defeated. I am alive, fully, fiercely, and with a heart that has learned its own power. So, I leave you with this question: if you were in my place, standing at the edge of betrayal and heartbreak, would you have the courage to walk away, to reclaim your life with dignity? I hope my story gives you a sliver of courage to do exactly that.